Good evening and welcome to New Hope Missionary Baptist Church's online Bible study. We're grateful to God that you're with us, and our hope and prayer is that everything is all right at your home or wherever you are on tonight. We have started a recent series about grief and loss, and it's subtitled Getting Through the Night. And we've been talking about some of the issues that are germane to people as we go through this season of COVID-19, and people have been experiencing losses, uh, the loss of loved ones, and unfortunately, today in our nation, uh, we passed a grim milestone where over 100,000 souls have been lost. And as we ponder and think about the magnitude of that, that is quite a few people who've gone on into eternity. And as we're talking about grief and loss, we're not just talking about the loss that we feel from the ache of not being with loved ones and family and friends. We're also talking about those other losses that people experience. Uh, Job report numbers came out on Tuesday, which show that in the last 2 months, over 40 million Americans have lost their job. 40 million people have lost their job. So we are in the throes of something that's deep and dreaded, and but we believe that this study is going to be helpful to us as we try to go through this dark night. I believe that, as the Bible does state, joy does come in the morning. So our goal is to equip ourselves, get the tools that we need, so that we can make it through the night and make it into the morning. So we praise God for that. So before we get started on Bible study tonight, if you could really do us a real major favor on tonight, if you could like this broadcast and also share it. I found one of the best ways to share is to click on the share button, go through your contacts. You never know who would really benefit from a word. So, be let the Spirit lead you. Go in and connect some people, and let them know that we're on. These studies have been helpful, and we believe that they also are designed to be hopeful. So we're looking at stages that people go through when they experience loss. Now, we want to be clear that while we call them stage, it does not mean that they follow in some sort of sequential order. Uh, it's quite possible that people can approach either the stages as the beginning point and go in any order. We like to consider it more than stages, but consider it more like a journey that we're on. And because it is a journey, it is a unique journey. And no two people will approach grief and loss the same way. Some people have different entry points, some people have different stresses on their life. And so none of us will be going through this journey the same way, but it is a journey. And so, because we are on the journey, and most of us have experienced loss in some sort of way, I think it's good for us to try to learn what we can from the journey that we're on. Okay, so tonight we're going to be looking at not just one aspect of this journey, but we're going to be looking at two of them. And we're going to be looking at what we call uh, bargaining and depression. We're going to look at two biblical stories to help us see what that's like. And we're going to be entertaining questions. We have a couple of poll questions that we're going to be raising tonight. But more than anything tonight, we really want to have your interaction. If you have a question, if you have a comment, just hit the comment bar space there and type in your response. Okay, so we want to thank God for you. Thank God that you came to share with us. And let me see, we got James Hall. I want to give a shout out to those who are on line with us right now live. Gloria Graham, Dolores Alexander. I hope you and your family are all right. Ruby Richardson, Denise Ravenel, Rosalind Young, Liz Jackson, Betty Gilliard, Rose Presley Alston, Delane Cowell, Jeanette Ayers, Lonnie Canary, Kenneth Carter for way down in Alabama. Thank you all for joining with us tonight. Um, so let me begin by stating that we're going to be dealing with two topics tonight in one time. Okay, so don't fear. We will get there. We will get through it all. But I think that these two topics we are able to join them together because as we go through the study, we're going to find out that they are oftentimes the two stages in grief that are inextricably linked together. That these two usually follow each other and they usually follow each other in the same order. Okay, not always, but a lot of times they do. Okay, so we talked about denial, we talked about anger, and tonight we're going to be talking about bargaining and depression. Okay, so we're going to start by looking at this. Uh, some of the things that we talked about before that people may be grieving about, maybe feeling a sense of loss, maybe going through these stages over, uh, loss of living space. A lot of people are being put out or having to struggle about renting and not having a job to pay bills, not being able to put enough food on the table, uh, losing a job, losing a family member, losing a friend. There are a lot of things. There's financial anxiety. There is just a lot. There's this anxiety over whether when I go outside, should I wear a mask? Should I not? You got countervailing opinions from all over the place. I just read today about a place in Texas that is going to refuse to serve people that wear masks. So we got all of these different opinions, which led to this sense of being numb because we got all this stuff going on and we don't really know how to process it. Okay, so tonight our first story that we're going to look at, it comes from the Old Testament. Matter of fact, both of the stories will come from the Old Testament tonight. The book Second Samuel, chapter 12, verses 11 through 24. Second Samuel chapter 12, verse 11 to 24. Now, some of you who are real students of the Bible know that as soon as we say Second Samuel chapter 12, that is the story of David and Bathsheba. Yes, it is. And so we're going to be looking at a segment of that story, and we're going to be looking at how it impacts this stage of grieving that we call bargaining. Okay, so let's begin. 2 Samuel, chapter number 11. Let me get it right here in my good book. And the scriptures will come up on your screen, but I want to read it from the good book right here. 2 Samuel, chapter number 12. And we're going to begin at verse number 11. Okay, this is what the Lord says. Out of your own household, I am going to bring calamity upon you. Before your very eyes, I will take your wives and give them to one who is close to you, and he will live with your wives in broad daylight. You did it in secret, but I will do this thing in broad daylight before all Israel. Then David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. Nathan replied, the Lord has taken away your sin. You are not going to die. But because by doing this, you have made the enemies of the Lord show utter contempt. the son born to you will die. After Nathan had gone home, the Lord struck the child that Uriah's wife had born to David, and he became ill. David pleaded with God for the child. He fasted and went into his house and spent the nights lying on the ground. The elders of his household stood beside him to get him up from the ground, but he refused, and he would not eat any food with them. On the seventh day, the child died. David's servants were afraid to tell him that the child was dead, for they thought, while the child was still living, we spoke to David, but he would not listen to us. How can we tell him the child is dead? He may do something desperate. David noticed that his servants were whispering among themselves, and he realized the child was dead. Is the child dead? He asked. Yes, they replied, he is dead. Then David got up from the ground after he had washed, put on lotions, and changed his clothes. He went into the house of the Lord and worshiped. Then he went to his own house, and at his request, they served him food, and he ate. His servants asked him, why are you acting this way? While the child was alive, you fasted and wept, but now that the child is dead, you get up and eat. He answered, while the child was still alive, I fasted and wept. I thought, who knows? The Lord may be gracious to me and let the child live. But now that he is dead, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I will go to him, but he will not return to me. Then David comforted his wife Bathsheba, and he went to her and lay with her. She gave birth to a son, and they named him Solomon. The Lord loved him. This is the word of our God. Amen. All right. Okay. Now, this is what I want to talk about tonight. The fact that this passage of scripture brings us to something that it is very common that we find when we have loss, and that is bargaining. And you see it in the text where David does what many of us do when we lose somebody that we love. We do what we call what if. You know, what if I hadn't done this? What if I had done that? What if I had done it a different way? What if I had gone to the doctor earlier? What if I got to the hospital? What if I had been able to pray with? And the bargaining is a way for us to plead with God and ask him for more time with our loved one. Okay, it's an attempt to trade something for something. And a lot of times what we do is we offer God a trade. And the trade might go something like this. God, if you save my loved one, I will serve you the rest of my life. Or, God, if you do this, I won't do that, or I will start doing something else. And that bargaining is what we bring to God in order to coerce him, in order to try to get him to change something. Some people think that it's more than negotiation. Some people think that it's our feeble attempt to hide from the reality. But as we look at this story of David, we're going to find out some interesting things and how he dealt with this issue of bargaining. Now, if you're new to this story, it is one of the most salacious stories in all of the Bible. It's about adultery. It's about intrigue. It's about murder. It when you talk about high crimes, all kind of things like that. It is in this story. This is a king who's not out with his army. He's not doing what he should be doing, and as a result, uh, he has seen a woman that he wants. He knows who she is, that he is one of his mighty men of valor. She is married to one of his uh, best soldiers, and he goes in and he sleeps with her, which prompts the man of God, who is the prophet Nathan, to come in and tell Nathan one of the great parables in all of the Old Testament, the story of a man who had one little lamb and another man who had herds of sheep. And he coveted the one little lamb that the man had and took the lamb from the man. And when David himself heard that there was somebody in his kingdom that was so cruel that would take somebody's one little wee lamb while having more lambs to spare, David promised that he would kill the man, that he would take the man out himself. And that's when the prophet Nathan points his gnarly finger at David and says to David, "Thou art the man." One of the great passages in all of the Bible where the table is turned on the person who assumes that the punchline is going to be, okay, I'm going to take this person to the gallows. I'm going to exact revenge on him, only to find out that he himself, the king, is the person who is guilty. And I think it reverberates because David feels like, in my opinion, that he has done something and he's gotten away with it because nobody saw it. Nobody knows. He tries his best to get Uriah to come home and lay with his wife. She won't do it. So eventually he has to go to plan B, which is to get an order execute that Uriah has to give to Joab, the general. And the order simply says, when the battle gets hot, put Uriah on the front line and don't tell him, but I want you to withdraw the troops. So basically, leave him out there to die. Not only did Uriah die, but the men around him died. All of this is what we call a cover up. So David feels like he's escaped, feels like he's gotten over, that nobody knows, and he's taking Bathsheba to himself. But then when the man of God reminds him of what happens, David says to us, I have sinned against God. Even though his sin was with Bathsheba, he recognized that ultimately all the sin that we do is really against God. Okay? And so what I wanted to talk about is when we look at this passage with David, David is going through some things, and what I wanted to share with you is that David has set in motion some things, okay? And there's a the book of Galatians, chapter number 6, you can check it out. It says, whatever a man sows, that will he also reap, okay? And so what happened is David has sown some stuff in his life, and pretty soon the reaping will start to happen. He's going to have to deal with the consequences of the actions that he has taken in his life. So we reap not only what we sow, but sometimes we reap what others have sown. Okay? So what I wanted to show you is this, is that David reaps what he sows. And the question I have for you tonight is, how are you suffering because of what a previous generation did wrong? How are you suffering because of what a previous generation did wrong? Okay? we talk about not being under generational curse, and I'm not putting anybody under curse. I'm not believing that you are, but I do believe that many times we suffer because of what a previous generation did, or what our parents did, or what somebody else did. And as a result of their wrong, uh, the people who have to bear the brunt of it is not just the person who did the wrong, but the person, a lot of times, who is just like collateral damage. You know, I, we talked a few weeks ago in another Bible study about this notion that they are victimless crimes. No, the person who indulges in the crime is also affected by what he or she does, you know. So David does this. He affects Bathsheba. He has taken Uriah's life. A baby comes into the world and is born. And as a result of David's actions, God says to David, I'm not going to take your life, but I'm going to take the life of this child. So the child loses its life not because it did anything wrong, but because David has done wrong. He has caused somebody to lose their life. Okay, so we'll think about that as we go forward. All right, so poll question number one. Okay. Um, okay, here goes. Poll question number one is going to come up on your screen. Let me read the questions to you. Um, and I just want to know, as we read the story earlier, what caught your attention? Okay. What really captures your attention in this story? Number one, is it David's fasting and prayer? Two, is it the death of the child? Three, is it David's reaction to the news of the child's death? Or four, the birth of Solomon to David and Bathsheba? Okay, what caught your attention? Okay, all right. Okay, so as we wait for the results to come in, this is not a trick question, but I just wanted you to see that there are a lot of things going on in the story, and as we look at it, all of these are possibilities. All of these, when you look at the story, you wonder whether it's, you know, David fasting and praying, which causes us to really wonder in amazement, because he fasts and he prays and he seeks the face of God, even though he knows that what he has done is not what God wanted him to do. So the death of the child. Now, I've thought long and hard about this myself. When I read the story, I think about the innocent victims, the person who really suffers in this story and has done nothing wrong. You got Uriah, who did nothing wrong, and you got this child that did nothing wrong. Those things really stick out to me. Also, the reaction to David, his reaction when the child is sick, and then when he hears that the child has died, is enough to have you scratch your head and wonder what in the world is going on with David. He does a 180-degree turn. I mean, he's on the ground. He doesn't eat. He's sullen. He's, he looks like he's catatonic, depressed. He looks like he can't deal with it. And then when he finds out the child is dead, he goes in and says, "Okay, I'm gonna get something to eat. I'm gonna get some food, uh, and that'll be that." Okay, so makes one wonder what in the world is going on. And then there's another thing that we see an allusion to, but we don't really when I first read the story, and every time I read it subsequent to this, I wonder about it. But at the end of the story, there is this footnote almost that David and Bathsheba have another child. They have another son, and his name is Solomon. And it's really about, and God was with him. So interesting that we see that, and wondered David's reaction to the news of his son was the number one that folk thought about tonight. So that's an interesting way to respond. Okay. So what I want to look at now, have you ever in your life, and let's take a moment and be reflective. I'm not at your house. I don't know what you've been through, but have you ever said to yourself, coulda, I shoulda, I woulda? Have you ever done that? Have you ever known something that was supposed to be done, and you succumb to the old coulda, shoulda, woulda? And if you understand that coulda, shoulda, woulda, you understand what we mean when we talk about bargaining, trying to make a deal with God. Okay, so David, it perhaps looks back over his life, and I wonder how many times some of us have had the privilege or the opportunity to look back over our lives and think about the stuff that we could have done, the things that we should have done, and the things that we would have done, and ask God, in essence, for another opportunity, asking for another chance, ask God for a do over, if you will. Okay. So the question I have for you then, and we touched on a little bit, but what does David's reaction to the death of his son tell you about him? What does his reaction? We saw that reaction, right? That when he hears that the son is dead, he stops mourning, he stops bargaining, he stops, the praying and the fasting, and stops all of that, and he goes in to eat. He washes himself, and he resumes what we call a normal life. What does that tell you about it? What do you think? What does that tell you? Okay. All right. So I'll give you a couple minutes. You want to write down some ideas for us. All right. And then we will take a look at that. All right. Okay. Trying to figure out, what does it tell us about David? His reaction to the death of his son. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. So we're waiting for some responses to come in. Okay. There we go. Okay. So while the responses are coming in, I'm just going to go a little bit forward, and I'll come back once we get those responses tabulated, and I'll share some of them with you live. Okay. But David is not the only one who has come up with this statement, about it, if only. And okay, so we do have some responses. Um, no emotion. Okay, thank you, Ametria. Good to hear from you. Hoping everything's all right with you and your family. Um, Anybody else have a response about what do you think is going on in the mind of David? Okay. Um, Elizabeth Jackson says he knows God keeps his promises. Okay. Betty Gilliard says he came to himself because it was out of his control. Okay. All right. All right. Well, that's one of the things when we talk about this third element, bargaining. We got denial, we have anger, and then bargaining. And bargaining, as we talked about earlier, is probably the shortest of the stages that we will go through. And the reason why it's so short is because the bargaining usually takes place while our loved one is still alive, if it's a terminal kind of thing, if it's a long illness or a terminal situation, we will plead with God. We will try to make some sort of deal with God for the lengthen out the days of our loved one. And then not only that, when the loss occurs, usually it's right after the loss occurs that we realize that uh, there's not going to be a bargain. There's not going to be a deal with God. We're not going to have this lengthened days. God's not going to bring them back to life. And so a lot of times the bargaining stage is right at the point of death or right when we hear about the passing of our loved ones. And that's where we go through all of the possibilities in our mind. And we say, if I hadn't asked them to do something, reading a case study in Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's book about a 75-year-old guy, 75-year-old gentleman. His wife was 66 years old. I believe his name was Willie in the case study. And she was talking about the fact that uh, he wanted to make sure that he and his wife had a long, productive life as they got older. And so he wanted them to start working out. He wanted them to start training to just stay in better physical shape. And so what Willie did, he got his wife and said to her, "Look, we need to start working out. We need to start training because we want to be around a long time. We want to experience, our children's children growing up and everything like that." And so she agreed, and so they started out slow on a running regimen where they would run around the community. They get up and run in the morning, and went pretty well. A few months into this regiment of running, uh, his wife, while running, was hit by a car, and they rushed her to the hospital, and she subsequently died in the hospital. And so Willie's approach to it was, uh, if I hadn't asked her to be physically fit, if I hadn't pushed her into running with me, this wouldn't have happened. And a lot of times when we have losses, we want to review everything. We want to view every instance and say, okay, maybe if I had said this, maybe if I didn't say that, maybe if I didn't do the other, maybe it wouldn't happen. So we say, I remember I talked to a lot of families when they experience loss, and I would hear the tension a lot of times around this bargaining. Okay, and you hear somebody say, if you had gone to the hospital, if you had visited so and so, if you hadn't been so demanding, or if you had done X, Y, Z, those are all bargains. Okay, it's all our way of trying to buy more time, trying to lengthen out the life of our loved one. And you can imagine in David's life, he had a lot that was probably going on in his mind. Can you imagine him saying to himself, and I'm sure he probably did, even though we don't have it written, but he probably did say, look, if only I had been out with the army, if I hadn't watched this woman on the roof, if I hadn't schemed to get a husband killed, if I hadn't done this, if I had listened to the man of God, Nathan, if I had listened to the voice of God. And we do that in hopes that we can bring our loved one back. But this stage often is short because we come to the realization real soon that the bargain didn't work. And then when we find that out, the if onlys it didn't work, um, you know, it plunges us into other things. And so I just want to talk about two things about with this bargaining. A lot of times when we bargain with God, and most of the time when we bargain, we are indeed bargaining with a higher power. We're not bargaining with somebody who we think can't make a difference. So we go to God and we say, God, why did this happen? God, if I do this, will you do that? And a lot of times we bargain with God because we want him to change the outcome. We want him to make it different. We want him to bring miraculous healing. We want him to bring the person back to recovery. We want him to change the outcome. And it's because a lot of times in our minds, we have a sense of what the outcome may be. And there's a part of us that doesn't want to accept the fact that we may be losing somebody we love. Okay? Another thing is we bargain to change the timing. Uh, it's been said often that sometimes people bargain with God for just one more day, just another day. God, just let me be able to call a loved one. Lord, just let me be able to see somebody. I remember I've been around the bedside of loved ones and who were transitioning. And I remember sometimes the hope and prayer was just let them stay around long enough till somebody gets there. You know, just let them stay, hang on, God, until somebody. And that's the bargain that we do. Okay, so this bargaining, as we said, that oftentimes it is short-lived. It's immediate. You know, we've been in shock, we're in denial, we're angry, and we offer God these trade offs. And when they don't work, a lot of times we get plunged straight into depression. Okay. And to talk about depression tonight, I want to talk about a story also that's very familiar in the Old Testament. It's in the book of Genesis, Genesis chapter 37. The largest story is in chapter 37, verses 12 through 35. But I just want to pull out a little piece of the story, okay, that deals with this intense grieving, okay? So let's look at this Genesis chapter 37, and I want to look at verses 31 to 36, okay? Verse 31 to 36 from Genesis chapter number 37. And those of you who are students of the Bible know that this chapter 37 is about none other than Joseph's uh, beloved son, Jacob's beloved son, Joseph, okay? And it's about what happens to Joseph, what his brothers do, and I want to just read this to you from the NIV, all right? Genesis chapter 37, verse 31 to 36. Now listen to this, okay? They got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They took the ornamented robe back to their father and said, we found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe. He recognized and said, it is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. No, he said, in mourning will I go down to the grave to my son. So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. Now, I want to talk about this because this usually follows right on the heels of a bargain. an attempt to negotiate the terms of the transition of our loved ones, uh, bargaining for more time, bargaining for a change in how that loss may be. But when that bargaining doesn't work, a lot of times it can plunge us headlong into deep depression. Okay, so we're gonna find out in the text what happens. Now, I want you to notice that there's so much going on behind the scene with Jacob and his sons. They know that this story that they concocted is a lie. They know it. Okay? They know that the last time they saw their brother, he was not dead. They also know the blood that was on their brother's coat is the blood of a goat and not a human. Yet, for some reason, they allow their father to go through this period of mourning and grieving, knowing full well that when they last saw their brother, they had sold him into slavery. So I wondered to myself, what could be more cruel? The lie, what they did to the brother, or the lie that they told the father? I don't know. But I do know that what happened as a result of this is that their father goes into intense mourning and he cannot be comforted. All right. So, because he can't be comforted, he's in what many of us would call an intense state of depression. Okay. Um, Now, I want to share with you about this because uh, grieving and depression is not a mental illness. There's nothing wrong with you when you grieve and you go through this period of intense feeling about loss. You're not mentally ill. Unfortunately, a lot of people, when they hear the word depression, they think mental illness. There's nothing wrong with Jacob. Mentally, he's not unbalanced or unstable. He is experiencing an extreme loss, okay? Which causes us to pause for a minute and bring up poll question number 2. Now, poll question number 2 is, let's look a minute at the intensity of this, what he feels, and let's see what we can find out, okay? All right. Okay. Now, let me read the poll question for you. Why is Jacob's grief so intense? Okay. His love for Joseph, his love for Rachel, the way his son died, or he wished he had left his son at home. Now, let's break them down. Okay. If you read the story of Jacob and his son Joseph, you know that he has this unhealthy relationship with his son. He makes this coat of many colors for Joseph. Joseph would become the next to the youngest son that he has, but at the time, he's the joy. He's his pride and joy. He's got 10 other sons who are older, and he doesn't give them the attention. He doesn't care about them nearly as much as he cares about Joseph. Okay. And the family knows it. Okay. Now, On the other hand, he has a wife, Rachel. He has Rachel's sister for a wife, Leah. He has their handmaids who also become his wives. And he uh, fathers children by at least four different women. But he only has one love in his heart that he really is in love with, and that's Rachel. Rachel is the one, you remember, right, that he worked 7 years for. And then on the wedding night, found out he actually slept with Rachel's sister Leah and had to work an additional 7 years. So for 14 years, he slaved with his uncle Laban for one woman. And he loved her like he loved nobody else, his love for Rachel. And the problem with Rachel was Rachel had no children. Leah was having babies, Reuben, and she had the firstborn. She gave him children, but she couldn't get his love. So finally, what happened with Rachel? Rachel gave Jacob her maid and told him, "Look, I can't have children, but she can have them." So he went and slept with her, and she produced children. And when Leah saw that, Leah gave Jacob her maid and said, "You go in to sleep with my maid, and whatever children we have, they will be ours." And after 10 boys, and after this barren period, there are no children, no children. Okay, um, so when Rachel finally has a child, he's over the moon. He's so excited, okay, because his love for Rachel was so deep. It cost him 14 years of his life just for the one he loved. And so the other question is maybe it was the way his son died. Remember, when you read the story, the sons don't tell him what happened. He offers maybe some ferocious animal killed him. And they probably got their fingers crossed behind their back saying, well, we didn't really lie to him. We just dipped it in blood, showed him the blood on the coat, and he came up with his own story. Well, maybe it was the fact that his son's life was cut short that caused him to grieve. Or maybe he's saying, what if? What if I didn't send him to Dothan? What if I didn't send him to Shechem to check on his brothers? I knew how the brothers didn't like him. I knew how my oldest sons didn't like him. I knew that it was going to be trouble. Maybe if I had just left him in the house, he would still be alive. And so what happens with Jacob is he is so moved by this loss that he can't even be comforted. They bring him comfort, but he won't receive comfort from anybody. And sometimes that happens when we lose folk that we love, is that it's hard for us to be comforted. Okay, so I wanted to point out, make a point here. Okay, after bargaining doesn't work, reality sets in, and when the cold reality sets in that our loved one is gone, that the job really is over, that whatever we feared really does happen. Okay. Um, okay. Now, well, and the poll, oh yeah, results came in. The poll was his love for Joseph. Okay. Um, okay. All right. So if you think about those four choices, and I believe any of them could be right. You know, his love for his wife, Rachel, his love for Joseph, his regret about sending the boy out in the first place, the way he died. But in this poll, the winner is that his love for Joseph. Okay, it affects his intense grief. Okay, and if Jacob has this, what about you and I? When we lose somebody we love, aren't our feelings as intense? Don't. I mean, sometimes like Jacob, we vow that we're gonna go to the grave feeling like this. That there's nothing that could be done. There's nothing that could be said that's ever going to change our mind about what happened. Okay. Uh, During this stage of depression, intense grief, uh, and it's often characterized by inability to sleep, loss of sleep. Okay. You lose your appetite, you lose your motivation for living. A lot of those things happen as a result. Okay. Now, I want to give you a couple tips before we end on if you're in this stage of depression, and it can last because it's a journey. We don't know how long it's going to last. There's no rule that says it only lasts a week, a month. It can last for a prolonged period of time. But we're going to give you some tips on how to handle depression when we lose people that we love. Okay, so let me give you a couple of these tips. Okay, um, first tip is give yourself permission to feel your feelings. Okay, there's nothing wrong with you because you feel that you lost somebody you love. Okay, a lot of times people will talk to you and try to get you to think that you shouldn't be feeling like this, but it's natural when we lose someone. They could be, a Christian. They could love Jesus, and we know that they're in a better place, but we still have a sense of loss. Okay, so that's normal, and don't let people tell you that you shouldn't feel. Okay, because that only buries what we feel, and eventually those feelings are going to surface. They're going to come up, and because we know that happens in grief. Okay, so one thing we tell people is don't try to suppress your grief. I mean, don't try to medicate it. Don't try to drink it away, smoke it away, get high. Find different ways to deal with our grief. So we got to realize that yes, it happens, but we don't want to suppress it because the grieving is natural. It's natural. I mean, it would be unnatural to lose somebody or something you love, to lose a job that you've had for years, or to lose your ability to take care of yourself and not have any feelings. Okay, so try to suppress it. Don't try to over medicate it. Don't try to anesthetize yourself by going out getting drunk or getting high and pretending it doesn't exist, because once you're sober up, it's gonna be right there. Okay. Another tip what we give people is that express your feelings to others. Talk to people. One of the best things you can do if you experience loss is be around people and talk about your loss. Talk about the person that you lost. Talk about how what they meant to you. Uh, because every time you tell a story, it's cathartic. It helps you. Okay. First of all, it helps you get past the bargaining stage. It helps you get past this new reality that you're now living in, where the person is no longer with you. One of the tragedies with Jacob's story is that Jacob refused to be comforted. He probably told people, "Look, I don't want to talk about it no more. Don't bring it up to me," and it didn't help him. And the tragedy is doubly compounded when his own boys knew exactly what had happened to the son, but they let him believe that the son had been killed. Just horrific, just horrific. Another point I want to make is this: set small exercise goals. Okay. Now, what happens when you lose somebody and they're close to you, and you're going through this feeling where you've been through denial, anger, bargaining, and now you're into depression where you have these intense moods and mood swings. Sometimes it's hard just to get out of bed. And so we talk about small exercise. Sometimes you just got to say to yourself, I'm going to go walk to the corner and back. I'm going to walk around the block and back. That's it. I'm not go out and try to go to the gym and but just something small that gets me out of where I am so that I can start now reconnecting with life and living. Okay. So we don't want to give you a tremendous dose. We just say, okay, let's just start moving ourselves forward. Okay. Another tip we say is this: uh, plan ahead for grief triggers. Now, what we mean is this: you lose somebody you love, you know there are going to be some triggers, right? And some obvious triggers are holidays like Memorial Day, okay? Or like the 4th of July, or events where family would have come together. If it was marriage, your anniversary is going to be a trigger. Their birthday is going to be a trigger. And so we know that these triggers are coming. Christmas, holidays, those times, they're going to be triggers. And you may have some other special events in your life that are going to trigger, emotions. They're going to trigger remembering when we used to be together. And so what happens, we say to people, look, we know those times are coming. So it might not be a bad idea that when those days come on the calendar and those triggers come, I need to have family around me. I need to have folk around. I need to be telling people, look, this would have been our first anniversary. This would have been our 50th anniversary. This would have been, and so people know that, look, this is a rough place that you're going through. That this is a tough patch on the journey for you. And know that those triggers are coming. So when you know the trigger is coming, people can say, okay, look, I'm going to be praying for you. I'm going to call you. Hey, how you doing? Why? Because, it was a year ago this week that you lost your loved one. Those are triggers. Anniversaries, anytime those big days come up, they are triggers. And so it's good to have family and friends around who are going to help us negotiate those tough times. Okay. And so we see it in the life of Jacob. Jacob has his sons who want to help. He has family that want to be there, but he's not able to get beyond his intense feelings and his depression where he can even accept it. He made up his mind. I'm going to the grave just like this. But thanks be to God. And we're going to find out more about this next week. But God gives each of us hope. Jacob gets it later on in life. I mean, it's literally about 17 years later from the time that his boys told him that his son was dead, that he will get some news that will change his life. And in fact, when you read the rest of the book of Genesis, um, from really chapter 40 on, you find out when he heard about his son being alive, it gave him literally a new lease on life. He had new energy, he had new purpose, he had new passion. Okay. And so what God does for us, he allows us to go through these seasons. And what I want to say, just before I leave you about this, we're talking about bargaining and depression. Understand that these are stages. It doesn't mean that we go through the stage one, two, three, or four like that. Okay. Sometimes when people find out with depression, is depression will leave you and come back. It'll show up out of nowhere. You think that you've dealt with it, you think that you overcome it, and all of a sudden it decides to come back and move in with you. But understand, it's a part of your journey, okay? And because it's a part of your journey, it will come in, it will take up residence with you, and you recognize that because it's just a part of your journey, okay? It may come and stay a while. It may come and just boom, as quickly as it comes, it may leave. We don't know what activates it. We don't know what causes it to happen. But it doesn't always happen that we grieve at one time, and once it's over, we never go into moods. We never get irritable. We never get sad. We never get down. And it may happen, and you may not ever even know what triggered it. But thanks be to God, God is able to bring each of us through these journeys. Um, David the psalmist said it himself. He said, "Yea, though I walk through the valley and the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil." And even though it's around us, even though it's this journey that we're on, God will allow each of us to go through this journey. Now, it may be a long night. It may be, as Jacob said, for the rest of my life. But thanks be to God, no matter how long it is, we've got a God who declares that He's going to be with us. Okay. So before we close tonight, we're going to ask that anybody have a question about these two aspects of grief and loss, bargaining and depression. If you have a question, just type it in on the comments bar. We'll be sure to read your question aloud and answer them if we can. Okay? So uh, just take a moment. Anything you heard tonight, or maybe something you want to share with us around the area of bargaining. Maybe you've been through this bargaining stage or the depression stage. Maybe you're in the stage and you're looking for some clues on how to get out, how to move forward. Whatever question you have, share it in the comments. We will we will talk about them, and after we field a question or two, then we'll close out with a word of prayer. Okay. Okay. Now, Rose Morgan says, "Doesn't depression come from the enemy?" Well, let's look at that for a minute. Thank you. That's a very good question. Um, the depression part of the grieving cycle is normal. Okay, uh, even Jesus himself, uh, as he was dying, as he was bargaining with God, because he went to the bargaining set, himself, where he asked God to take the cup from him. Uh, on the cross, he asked, "Why has he been abandoned?" Okay, uh, depression that we're talking about is not a clinical depression. It is a part of the human cycle of grieving. It is not foisted on us by the devil. It's not that the devil put it on us as something to carry or to bear. Um, it is something that is born out of the fact that we have intense longing and the desire for our loved one. They are no longer there, that we're no longer able to be with them. And you find that throughout the Bible, there are numerous instances of people who experienced grieving and went through these periods when they were down and depressed. Okay. So I do think that there are aspects, as your question raises, of some things that we do that are unhealthy, that are not, that God doesn't sanction. But I think that the grieving, because it is a natural part of the rhythm of our lives, that we grieve. I mean, think about it. If we lose something that's dear to us, it's not uncommon to feel some kind of way about it. And because you feel that way about something that you lose, doesn't mean that the devil is wreaking havoc in your life, or that somehow you become a pawn of the enemy. Am I making myself clear with that? So there can be places and times when people um, have been given over to the enemy, but we don't have cases in the Bible uh, that where believers grieved that was as a result of something that the enemy was doing. You know, all one does. You go back in the book of Job, Job chapter 1 and 2, where Job lost all of. He lost 10 children. He lost everything he had, and we go from there up until chapter 31 till we actually hear God say something. His friends say things about him. He experiences this great, feeling of loss, and that's really what grieving is. So it's a normal part of living. Uh, and we also want to underscore that anybody who's going through the grieving process now, you're not clinically crazy. All right. Uh, you don't have a most people that go through this period of depression is not a clinical depression. Uh, but if it persists, if it lingers, if it hangs on for a long time, then maybe that is an indication that maybe you need to talk to a professional, get some additional help. Okay. Hopefully that answered your question, but thank you so much for that. Okay. All right. Beverly Sellers says, does it ever get better when we lose a loved one? I think it may get easier, but we never forget. I agree with you wholeheartedly that no, we never do forget. I think that when we talk about next week, we're going to talk about acceptance. And then the week next week, we'll be combining acceptance and hope as the final two elements. And we're going to find out that, yeah, that there is a thing called hope. It doesn't mean that we are over it, because as we talk about depression, it may come back without notice. Uh, my mother's been she left me, quite a few years ago, but there are days that I'm intensely aware of her absence. And then there may be days that I go through where I don't think about it at all. But then the times when I do, it weighs heavy on me. So does it go away? Uh, no. But I think that as we're going to find out next week, give you some tips on how to get to acceptance and get to the flip side of the depression and the bargaining, the denial and the anger, and that's hope. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. And before we go, we're going to ask you if you would join us in the word of prayer. Uh, we need to pray, and we need to stop underestimating the value of prayer. More things are wrought in this world by prayer alone than any other force. God answers prayer. It's important that you and I pray. We cannot say to ourselves that God knows, so I don't have to pray. The, the reason why we pray is not because God knows, it's because we don't know. And so we ask Him, and we entreat Him to step in on our behalf. We ask Him to do for us what we can't do. And we know ultimately that whatever is going to be done is thy will be done. So let's pray. Lord, we thank you for tonight. We thank you for all of those who gathered with us to look into this word about bargaining and depression. And we know, God, these are probably the two most difficult phases that many will go through when they experience loss and grief. But Lord, we thank you that you're the God who can keep us, that you're the God who was able to keep David, and the God also who was able to keep Jacob. And God, what they've experienced is no different than what we experience. We have loved ones. We want for them more than anything that they would have life and have it more abundantly. But God, we just ask God today that you would come into our lives, that you would open up our hearts, open up our minds, and please, God, our understanding. I pray for everybody who is listening that you would bless them. Bless those who are on the front line, our first responders, our officers, our nurses, our delivery people, our mail people. God, I pray that you would bless those folk who are essential, who've had to go to work in the middle of this pandemic, who've had to struggle with, am I bringing it home? Am I going to infect somebody at home? I pray, God, that you would put a hedge, a fence, a protection around them and keep them safe. Lord, I pray not only for them, but I pray for our leaders, our political leaders, our government officials, that you would give them wisdom. And Lord, while everybody wants to go back to work, wants to open up the economy, I pray, God, that you give us your wisdom, that no life would be lost. I pray, God, that you would watch over those who are down, those who are feeling particularly heavy in their heart, that you would lift our spirits. Now, God, bless those who are listening and looking for hope. God, we know that you got all power in your hand, that you're not absent, that you're always present. So, God, continue to go with us. Continue to hold us in your hand. Lord, look on our young people. Look on our children. Lord, I pray for the situations that are breaking out all over our nation. Lord, I pray for the unrest over in Minnesota, what's happening with our young black men. I just pray, God, that you bring peace on our land. Bring peace where we can live together with each other. Now, God, go with us and stand by us and bless those who will give to support this ministry. We ask all of this in the strong name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.